Here I have an interesting Hyperlambda file. It is 53 lines of code, and it's basically an HTTP endpoint allowing me to page, sort, and filter from my dentist CRM database and its clients table. And I can immediately execute it from here. Whoops, I had selected some code here. Returning items from my database. So the thing is in production, 53 lines of code. I took this code, I copied it, and added some more comments to avoid confusing ChatGPT. And then I pasted it into ChatGPT here with the following instruction. I want you to port following Hyperlambda file to C# code following all best practices, such as solid and using IOC to apply separation of concerns. Use minimal API and return all code required to have a functioning solution. Finish with how many lines of code and how many files you need. And here I pasted in the code. And then ChatGPT starts producing code for me. Okay, so we need a client model. Then we need a DTO for parameterizing the get invocation. These are the parameters, the query parameters to the endpoint basically. And then we need an interface declaration, file number 3 so far. iClient repository, using repository patterns apparently. Then it creates a client repository implementation, a service implementing the interface. And then it creates an appdb context.cs, it's using entity framework. And then it's creating the client service.cs file, which is responsible for actually retrieving items from the controller endpoint. And here we have the program using minimal API. As you can see here now, it gets the service injected here, and it just returns the result of that service. 8 files, 310 lines of code. Calculator, 310 divided by 53, almost 6 times as verbose, and 8 times as many files. Now the latter point is very, very important, and let me illustrate why, because here is the solution in VS Code, the exact same code. Here you see the DB context, you see the DTO, you see the interface, you see the model, and you see the repository, and you see the service, and you see the program.cs file. Now, if I need to edit my code here, I need to swap between 8 different files. So if let's say I want to add the query parameter, okay, now I gotta add the query parameter in client query parameters.cs. Then I have to update my client repository here, right, to accommodate for that specific client parameter. Query parameter, etc. And then I need to modify my controller, etc., etc., etc. Now, people have been criticizing me for showing only simple examples, right? So let's do something about that. Let's say I want to add authorization requirements. Okay, auth dot verify admin. Save. Now only root admin users can execute my endpoint. Let's say I want to publish a socket message, signal, howdy.bar, args, message, read, client was invoked. Save. I'm now publishing a socket message every single time somebody reads items from my database. Let's say I wanted to have an HTTP get invocation, okay, http.get, https://pool.com, query, limit. Okay, so I'm now invoking an HTTP get invocation upon every single read invocation towards this particular endpoint, etc., etc. You see, I can do this with every, if I now go to clients.delete, right, copy this code, okay, 19 lines of code. I go back to ChatGPT and I open a new window and I paste in this code and I start out with the same stuff I started with here. I get the same result. I get hundreds of lines of code. right? To do the same, I can get away with 10, 15, 20 lines of code in Hyperlambda. We got 19 lines of code here in Hyperlambda. Let's see how much code it produced for us this time. For the delete invocation, it's still not even done. You know, I can code faster in Hyperlambda than ChatGPT can code the same solution in C#. Literally, I'm not even kidding. Okay, so 115 lines of code, 6 files. One file, 19 lines of code. Same figures, right? Almost a ratio of 1 to 6. I can go through every single Hyperlambda snippet I've ever created in my entire life and do the same, and the result is consistently the same. 5 to 50 times as much code. And what's even more interesting is that I didn't even write this code. Let me prove it by deleting the entirety of the dentist_CRM folder. You saw me deleting the folder now. Now let's go to the CRUD Generator and let's choose our dentist CRM table, and let's, do search and distinct in addition to left join and verbose filtering, right? And the system produced 2,762 lines of code for me in 0.1 second. No AI, only meta programming. And here you see every single file. And each file is one HTTP endpoint. So this was like almost 3,000 lines of code. If I was to reproduce this in C#, would end up with 15,000 lines of code and 8 times as many files to maintain as the Hyperlambda solution. And it's the same all over the board. And this file, for the record, does way more, or these files, does way more than, just simple CRUD. Here is search, for instance, where I can provide a query that searches through all columns in my database for occurrences of that particular filtering condition, etc., etc., etc. So not only is my Hyperlambda code far more complex than your average code if you are the average enterprise software developer, but it's also 1/5, sometimes 1/10 of the size, right? And that proves that declarative programming languages such as Hyperlambda are simply superior to C# and OOP and anything you can create with traditional means.